Okay. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Barrett Sunday live stream. You've only got me today. Ollie went out on a night out last night, so he's pretty tired. He's having a longer sleep in this morning. But on the show today, we have Jonathan from Numuves. Just before I go over to Jonathan, I just want to say, give a shout out to some people who are recognized. So we've got Trevor Norman, we've got Samantha Jenkins, Dr. Yu, Fat KY. Welcome into the chat, guys. Oh, see, Quantum Alchemist is in again. Appreciate that. So today we're going to sort of talk with Jonathan from Numuves, because Jonathan from Numuves is quite an interesting guy. He's basically a Chinese Canadian, and his family spent time from Hong Kong, right? Your family's originally from Hong Kong.
Correct, yeah.
And then I think they moved to Canada, but now Jonathan is back in Guangzhou. So over to you, Jonathan. Introduce yourself, and then sort of tell us your story, and then we'll get some input from the viewers.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I just want to say thanks so much for having me on the show. It's really an honor to be on this great channel. I've been watching you guys since you started, and I'm a big fan. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my story.
That's no problem.
Just in case you don't know anything about my channel, I've been doing YouTube for 10 years. My channel was started 10 years ago, and my name Numuves comes from the idea of making some new moves in the media, because I just felt like I had some really interesting experiences in Toronto of seeing how the media portrays events. I took part in these protests, the G20 protests in Toronto 10 years ago, and I really was so uncomfortable with the way the media tried to portray all of us in a very, very evil, negative light. So since that moment, I started YouTubing, and I wanted to create a channel, create a way for us to put out a message, and so that's why I created this kind of like independent media channel. So that's the reason for the name Numuves. Yeah, and so if you do go to my channel, you're going to see a lot of interesting things like documentaries, on the ground reporting.
Yeah, you do. You do quite a lot of that, where like in the Guangzhou thing, you actually went and spoke to Africans, didn't you, on the ground? And the same with Hong Kong. Yeah. You actually went there, didn't you? and that's pretty brave, really, man. I think, but yeah, I mean, I watched almost every video you put up, and you know, you've got some really pretty good stuff. Especially like the one you did, your latest one on the Tiananmen Square, and even it gave me an angle where I'd never quite looked at it like that before. So yeah, but please go ahead, carry on.
I'm so wow. I'm so surprised you watch a lot of my videos. Yeah, I'm really happy.
Yeah, they're really good.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what I'm really happy about is I was able to go, because I live in Guangzhou. I was able to go to Hong Kong. You know, actually go and interview people living in Hong Kong.
And how long does it take you to get to Hong Kong from Guangzhou, Jonathan?
Well, actually, what I do is I go through your city. So I take the high-speed train to Shenzhen, and then from Shenzhen, we just cross the border. I forgot the name of the border, like Tian. There's a couple. There's like 3 or 4 borders.
There's 2 or 3. Yeah. There's 2 or 3 border crossings.
So I just go through one of the borders, and then I take the subway from there. From, I think, into. Actually, no, sorry. There's a direct train. I forgot. Now there's a direct train to Hong Kong. I forgot about that.
That's right. Yeah, but it's about. Is it about an hour from Guangzhou?
Yeah, I think it's about an hour. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember a few years ago when I used to live in Guangzhou, it'd take over 2 hours to get from sort of the Hong Kong border into Guangzhou. Right. But now it's like, I think less than an hour, isn't it? It's on the high-speed train. Yeah, pretty cool. Okay.
Yeah, in the old days, you had to like get off at Shenzhen and go through the huge port, and that took a long time. But now it's a lot faster now. Yeah.
Yeah, that's much cooler. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was saying was, I'm really lucky because I live in Guangzhou. So I was able to go to Hong Kong and actually interview protesters, and also I interviewed someone that didn't support the protest. So that was my first viral video. So even
that's really interesting. That was
like nobody knows me, but because I put out this video that actually had someone saying, "I don't support the protests. I'm really unhappy with what's happening. that video went viral, and I got 150,000 views, even though I'm a
Yeah,
total
that's pretty
nobody.
cool.
So that was amazing because nobody in the mainstream media or even on YouTube, nobody gave those people a voice. There was not one video of people saying, I don't support this. And when we saw the
Yeah.
elections in December, we saw that 43% of the people don't support the protest when we look at the district election popular numbers. So,
Hmm.
yeah. And I've
Yeah,
also, like you said, yeah.
it's quite interesting how, you know, when you're here, you see a very different side to the events as what people in the US, Europe and the UK are seeing, because the Western mainstream media in general portray a very kind of biased image, don't they? They were really pushing on how violent the police were. And actually, in my personal opinion, I thought the police were really pretty patient, far more patient than you'd ever see police if that kind of thing happened in, France, Germany, the US, even to some extent the UK. And I thought they were really very patient. How do you feel? What do you think?
I totally agree with you. Like I said, I started this channel because I participated actually in protests in the G20 in Toronto. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the G20 meetings, but yeah.
I am, yes, yeah. It's a kind of
Yeah.
bigger event than the G7, right? With more countries
Yeah, yeah.
involved. Yeah.
Yeah, G7 is just the 7 greatest economies, and G20 is like the 20 largest. So
Yes,
that's why
sure.
I started YouTubing because I was protesting. I was part of the protest as an
Oh, you
environmentalist
you
at
were
the
a
G20.
protester.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm an
okay.
activist. Yeah, I'm an
Oh
activist. I'm a
man.
progressive type person. So
Hmm.
when the media in Canada framed us as all evil and all this stuff, I didn't really like it, and that's when I started doing YouTube. But I saw the police in Toronto, and they were decked out in the full riot gear, and I saw them like instigate things with protesters. Like they would push us, or they would just say really mean things. They would just try to insult you so that you would start
Uh-huh.
violent things, and then they could beat you up, kind
Yeah,
of
so
stuff like
they're
that.
trying to
So
stir it up, right?
yeah. And
Wow.
yeah, I saw like horses trample people in Toronto. I saw them like knock down a disabled person. The G20 protests in Toronto were crazy, and it was actually a historic moment in Canada. It was the
Hmm.
largest mass arrests in Canadian history during those G20 protests. And most of the protesters were peaceful, but there were some violent people. Though. I'm not going to deny that
Hmm.
there were some
Sure.
black bloc people. They were called, and they were violent. So I mean, I've had experience with really aggressive policing in Canada, and what I saw in Hong Kong were, in my opinion, they were very restrained, very very restrained.
Yeah,
I mean, I saw,
I back that up. What I
yeah,
saw, which was mainly from sort of video of people like you and a few other people there, compared to other countries. I've seen stuff in France and Germany where the yellow vests in France, and the police there, they really don't take any messing about. They are, they really deal with it quickly and harshly.
yeah,
Um, and I think that was something that they didn't really do. There was a couple of um, pieces of footage that came out of Hong Kong which showed the police reacting a bit more aggressively, but they were very sort of small clips which were taken out of context. And if you saw the whole clip with the
right,
context, what one policeman was getting attacked by quite a lot of protesters, so he sort of exerted force in retaliation, in defense.
right,
Not he wasn't sort of attacking, he was just defending himself, which is fair enough to me.
right, yeah. I mean, especially when you compare what's happening in America right now and the Hong Kong
Oh no,
situation,
yeah,
it's just night and day. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
the Hong Kong protests have been going on for almost a year, and
Hmm.
they never called martial law. They never started a curfew in Hong Kong, but there's already been curfews. After 2 days, there were curfews in America, and people
Hmm.
need to be inside by 8 p.m. It's unbelievable. 8 p.m. That is
Yeah, that's.
unreasonable.
I think it's earlier in some states. I was seeing something on the news as one state. I can't remember which one. Like it was Washington or New York, but it's at 5:30 p.m. You know,
Yeah,
but I was watching a piece of video a couple of days ago about the American. There's this guy just coming across a sort of zebra crossing, like a crossing point, pushing his bike, and kind of 3 police just started kind of attacking him. Again, I'm not sure whether that video was taken out of context, but it was being filmed from somebody that was stopped at the crossing in their vehicle. And one policeman started it's an African, a black guy. One policeman started hitting him with a truncheon, and then 2 others kind of joined in. And it was like, what's this guy done to deserve that? He's just like on his way home, apparently, And I think, wow, I think it's something really interesting. I follow a guy on YouTube called Bo of the Fifth Column.
Yeah,
and
I like him.
He was kind of, one of his videos, he was talking about, he used to be a trainer of police in the US. And he was talking about, he was given a training session one day, and he sort of said something, and one of the police in the training session says, oh, well, it doesn't really matter because we're the ones that write the reports anyway, and nobody's going to believe a criminal's word against the word of the police. And he says that when that police guy said this, all the other sort of police in the room were kind of laughing, and he's saying that was the last day he ever taught the police, because he says you've got this inbuilt thing where they will kind of be untruthful or lie to cover their own backs. So they will concoct the story because they're the ones that are writing the report on the incident. And he also sort of, kind of allures to that there's kind of institutional racism within the American police. And I think that's really hard to weed out, but I think they need to address that situation big time.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's
yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of, what do they call it, when they just target people based on their race. They'll pull people over in America, right? Like if a black person is driving, they'll just pull them over. I forgot what that's called.
Yeah.
When you just target people.
Yeah, and it's sort of stop and search thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's been building up. I mean, there were a lot of things happening before this huge blowout. There was another black man that was just chased down by 2 brothers, and he was just shot and killed. I forgot his name. It was Arbery. I think something like Arbery. I think it was the last name.
Mm-hmm.
And after that,
that's right.
And after that, there was a clip of a woman in New York, I think Central Park, and she was walking her dog, and then a man just told her, please put your dog back on a leash, because this is not, you have to have your dog on a leash in this park. And the man filming was an African American. Mm-hmm. And the white woman was like, I'm going to call 911. I'm going to call 911 on you. And I'm going to say you're a black man who's trying to assault me and all this stuff. And she did. And the man was filming the whole thing. So she was trying to use race and trying to use color as a threat to him. And she did it. She called 911. She said, and she put on this act. She put on this fake voice. She was like,
that's like
911. There's a black man harassing me. It was insane. So when the internet saw this, it was really a huge issue. And then right after that, George Floyd was murdered. So there were all these events building up to these protests. It wasn't just George Floyd. There were so many things, and of course, the COVID-19 has been killing black people more. At a higher rate. So
That's right.
This was this brewing, just this huge social.
Yeah, I think there's I think the George Floyd thing was just the spark that's lit the fire. I think there's a lot of underlying issues there. But I just want to sort of get back to Hong Kong. Where? How long did you spend in Hong Kong? Did you spend your childhood there, or are you a sort of second generation Hong Kong who grew up somewhere else?
Let's go to my I'll tell my story actually. Sorry, I never got to the
please.
So I have a pretty interesting story. I'm Canadian. I'm Chinese Canadian, and you could technically say I'm 4th generation. You could say that because my great grandfather went to Canada about 100 years ago. So I think during the end of the Qing dynasty, when China was like really poor, it was going through some really bad times. Those are some really, really bad times. He's like, you know what? He's like me. He's very adventurous. He's like, I'm just going to go to Canada and do this really dangerous work, but at least I'll make some money. So he went over there and he helped to build the Canadian Railroad, the CPR.
Okay.
And this was work that the white people were like, hey, let's give the most dangerous jobs to Chinese and Indians
Chinese
because
people, yeah.
we don't want to take dynamite and pour it into the holes. We'll just let the Chinese guys do that. So
Wow.
that's what the Chinese and Indian workers were doing. They were literally taking
Uh-huh.
liquid TNT and pouring it into holes,
Well,
and then
actually, it's
walking
funny
back.
because not that much has changed now. If you look around the world, um, you know, not so long ago, it was Chinese that did all the menial jobs. Now it tends to be a lot of Indians. You go to
Yep.
some of these Middle Eastern countries, and none of their own people will do sort of menial jobs. They're all, Chinese, Indians, Bangladeshis, these kind of people.
Sure.
So actually, not much has
Yeah.
changed in that sense, man. But
That's a good
yeah,
point. I didn't think about that. That's a good point. Thank you.
yeah,
So yeah,
they.
my great grandfather on my mother's side, he went there. And he did that for maybe a year or something, and he made a lot of money. So he was able to go back home, find a wife. He found my grandmother. Sorry, not my my great grandmother.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and they conceived a baby, which was my grandmother.
Uh-huh.
And then he went back to Canada to be like, hey, let's do some more work. I'm making good money while the Qing dynasty is crumbling. I'm making good cash in Canada. And what happened? Apparently, what happened was Canada just kept instituting these racist laws, like really, really racist. So the first one was called the head tax. I'm not sure if you've ever
Give
heard
me
of
one
it.
second. You carry on.
Yeah. So China instituted something called the head tax, and what that was Chinese people had to pay a huge amount of money in order just to come into Canada. And
So just got parcel
I'm not
delivery.
sure. Yeah, no problem. I was just explaining the head tax, where in order for Chinese people to come into Canada, they had to pay this huge tax, and it's equivalent to about 2 years' wages. Okay, at that time,
Whoa.
2 years' wages. That's the head tax. Okay,
Whoa.
Canada had it, and America had it. And what's funny at that time was Canada was allowing white people in for free, and actually they gave them free land. So a lot of white people, they came to Canada, they got free land, sort of drive out the natives, right? Just to
But at that time,
overpopulate the area.
they're discriminating against Chinese,
It
right?
was crazy. So the Chinese were paying
Wow.
these huge amounts, and then the white settlers were getting free land. What happened in Canada was after a few years, in about, I don't know, 1920, 1910, I forgot the exact year, they stopped all Chinese immigration. So it was called the Chinese Exclusionary Act. Okay,
Whoa.
Chinese Exclusionary Act. I think it was 1915, 1920.
I
Can't
didn't
remember.
know
Sorry, I don't
that.
remember the exact date. Yeah. So that what that meant was, I think my great grandmother was allowed to go over because she was like married to my great grandfather. So
Uh-huh.
they were allowed to reunite, but my grandmother wasn't allowed. So by that time, my grandmother was about 10 years old. She was not allowed to go to Canada
Wow.
because
To
of this
be with her
racist law.
parents.
Yeah. So what
Wow.
happened was my grandmother, over the years and years would pass, and she would wait to be allowed to go to Canada. And she would be waiting for 40 years because Canada didn't allow
Oh
any
my
Chinese
God.
until 1974, around there, with Pierre Trudeau. So the prime minister, you might know
Wow.
him, Pierre Trudeau.
I'm
Pierre
not
Trudeau is
familiar though.
actually yeah, he's actually the father of Justin Trudeau, who's the current prime minister. So that's the reason why
Wow.
Justin Trudeau is so famous, because his father was the one that kind of liberalized Canada, allowed Chinese and Indian immigrants. And at that time, my family was living in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally, my grandmother, who was waiting by her mailbox every day she would wait for the postman to come in for the news that she would be allowed to go to Canada to see her father. And when that day finally arrived in 1974 or something like that, they they my grandmother and her whole family, the entire extended family, packed up bags, got ready to go to Canada, to immigrate to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that year my great grandfather died.
Oh, what a
So my
shame.
grandmother was never able to meet her father in real person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the story of my family. So we've experienced, like the racism in
Yeah,
the most
man.
real way, in the most real way, not some bullshit,
Yeah, yeah.
some racist comments, like in a systematic, real way. Fortunately, the Harper government, like the Canadian government, actually apologized for the head tax, and um, they even paid some money back to the Chinese
Some
community for the head
compensations,
tax.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
God, it just shows
So
you
that's a
how things are. Yeah.
very
Man.
brief story of my family story. But I'll make a video about that, a very detailed video later on.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, I think that would be really, really interesting. Okay, so we got our first super chat in here of Trevor Norman.
Oh, good.
And thank you very much for that, Trevor. Appreciate that support. Trevor is one of our sort of long-time supporters, and he comes into almost every live stream we do. So appreciate that, Trevor.
Awesome.
Okay, so he said Hong Kong is part of China. The US needs to keep their nose out of it. So what do you think? I personally think that, look, Hong Kong was pretty much stolen from the Chinese during the Opium War time. You know, the UK and America, they made China agree to all these kind of treaties and sign all these things, you know, because they were just pumping the population with Indian opium. So in a sense, it was stolen off China in 20 odd years ago. There was the agreement to hand it back to China. And although there was this sort of 50-year sort of agreement put in place, I mean, I don't think the Chinese government, certainly at that time, would want to change anything anyway, because it was a big cash cow. You know, the economy in Hong Kong was massive. You know, all the financial hub at XYZ. Yeah. But I think I do believe that Hong Kong is China. It's part of China. It's another Chinese city, and I do think it's wrong for these outside, the USA, the UK, to be meddling in their affairs. Just want to know what you feel about that.
Oh, just about how the West is treating China right now?
How they're trying to interfere with what's going on in Hong Kong. I mean, I have my suspicions that. And it's the same as the Xinjiang issue. I really don't think the US cares that much about the people of Hong Kong or the people of Xinjiang. I think it's more of a thing to try and stir up trouble for China, because they're really anti-China from a point of view that technologically China are getting so much stronger. And I just feel that these countries will find any excuse to try and destabilize and stir up trouble. That's my view.
Yeah, in my personal opinion, I feel like that's the same thing as well. I mean, I think Hong Kong, I view Hong Kong as sort of the weakest point in the Chinese border kind of thing. If you look at the whole periphery of China, I would say Hong Kong would be the weakest point, because there are no, Beijing doesn't have any real laws governing a lot of things in China. They just implemented the national security law. And the Western media went crazy. They just tried to implement, I think, the most basic security laws, and the West literally went nuts. And they even said, we're going to take away Hong Kong status. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And they kept putting out these media reports saying Hong Kong is dead, and Hong Kong's autonomy is all gone. And well, first of all, Hong Kong was never fully autonomous. It had a high degree of autonomy. That's what it's written in the treaty, that it would be a high degree of autonomy. But the media likes to put out these kind of like semi-lies, and they would say Hong Kong's autonomy is ended, but they never explained that Hong Kong was never fully autonomous. It's not an independent state. Yeah. And the feeling I get from the media is they try to pretend as if Hong Kong is some kind of independent, place, but it's just a state of China with a lot of autonomy. I mean, it has more. Has its own passport and all these things. It does have a lot of special. We've
got. I know a guy. He's actually a British guy, but he's lived in Hong Kong for sort of 40, 45 years, maybe longer. And he was there when it was under British rule, and he was there while it swapped over to China, and he's been there ever since. And we have an interview coming up with him at some point in the future. And I think that will be very, very interesting, because in his opinion, that he says they have just as much, if not more, freedom since it was taken over by China than when it was a British colony. And that's in stark contrast to what the Western media portray. Right. I think that's really interesting, because, he's somebody that's lived through the whole transition period. So I think, his views are very, valid. And the other thing I would say, and I can't confirm this is just from my own experience and what I've seen. If you look at the older people in Hong Kong, they don't seem to have such a problem as the younger people. And yeah. I wonder if you've noticed that, and I wonder why that is. Is that because the it's been sort of said that they are the ones that have been influenced by the outside more so than the older people, simply because a lot of the older people probably can't speak English as well as the younger people? How do you feel? What do you think about that?
That's a great question. That's such a good question. Why is there such a divide between the old generation and the younger generation in Hong Kong? We see the same thing in Taiwan. Sorry, I don't want to change subjects, but in Taiwan as well, the older generation support not leaving China, but the young people want independence. But I'll go back to Hong Kong. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. I think the older generation, they actually lived through the colonial period, right? So if you're like 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old, if you're older than 30, you will have remembered what it was like to live under British rule. But if you're only 20 years old, then you wouldn't. You've only lived under Chinese, in the mainland, under Beijing's rule. So I think the older generation know viscerally, and they know with their real life experience that it wasn't that great to be a colony. It wasn't completely terrible. I would say Hong Kong was probably a little bit better than other colonies, but they still didn't have a lot of rights, and there were a lot of protests, violent protests against British rule. I've heard of really brutal crackdowns. I've heard stories about that. So
yeah, Nathan Rich made a video about how when there were some demonstrations when Hong Kong was under British rule by the police, and actually Hong Kong citizens were killed at that time. Yeah, because the police were really pretty brutal to sort of suppress those protests. So again, it's all these double standards. But your second point was
my second point, I think, is basically a cultural campaign. I think the West has done a lot to try to influence the young generations, not just in Hong Kong, but I think even in Canada. Even me, I can say I was someone who was indoctrinated to dislike, fear, and kind of hate the mainland China. So, and in my latest video that you watched, I talked about Tiananmen Square and how I was indoctrinated since I was a kid to sort of fear and hate mainland China. So I think the same thing has been happening with the youth in Hong Kong, the youth in Taiwan. I mean, you can like listen to music and watch all these TV episodes and play games that they literally say like F China in the music, So
wow.
From a young age, you're just taught we should hate China, we should take down the Chinese government.
That's terrible.
They just say it outright, and so I think they really have been influenced, and they're kind of believing that Western countries are these utopian, perfect places.
I often see this that when I speak to sort of Chinese people within the mainland, and I've got first-hand experience. I know a young lady who, before she went to the UK, she thought, wow, the UK, it's like the promised land. There's no crime there. Everybody earns a great salary. There's a fantastic education. And then when she got there, she it wasn't herself, but her friend, a Chinese person who lived there, got burgled in the house, and she couldn't believe it. She says, well, why do people commit crime here when everybody's got such a good salary, everybody's so well educated? And actually that isn't the truth. A lot of these Western countries have a lot of social problems. There are a lot of uneducated people. There are a lot of people who don't earn good salaries, and this is something that I think the majority of Chinese who've not traveled abroad just don't realize. I'm going to have to push on to a couple more super chats because there's a couple coming in. So,
do you mind if I say one?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go on.
I'll just say one more comment before we switch the topic. The Western media always loves to say Chinese propaganda. So they always say, "Oh, the Chinese and their propaganda and blah blah." But I think we're forgetting. I think we're forgetting the most powerful propaganda machine in the world is Hollywood. Everybody watches Hollywood movies. Everyone watches American TV. So that's why these Chinese people consuming that media, they all believe those movies. So, when they go to marry, they expect life to be perfect, like in the movies, because that's all they've seen.
that's my experience here in the mainland, is that when you speak to Chinese people, the younger people, especially if their English is pretty good, oh, how do you practice your English? How do you learn your English? Oh, we watch American movies. So not only, but subconsciously, they're getting this picture of America. I've been to America many times. I've lived in the UK. The movies, it's just bullshit. They're like this sort of utopian lifestyle that actually doesn't exist. But a lot of younger Chinese are not aware of that. They think that's literally how it is. And my partner has even said to me sometimes, oh, I know this. Well, how do you know that? Oh, because I've seen it in the movie. Oh, no, but that's actually not true. It's because everything is glorified to look fantastic in the movies, and it really isn't, So
yeah. Oh, we could go on a lot, so I'll stop there. But we
okay.
This topic could be like 2 hours about Hollywood.
Yeah. So I've got a super chat here of Henglin. Hong Kongers and most 95% of Taiwanese raving about independence are ethnically Han Chinese. It's sad they forget where their ancestors came from. That's an interesting point, isn't it? Yeah,
super interesting. Yeah,
and I think this goes to say, like we've just said, a lot of the older generation don't want to be independent. It's this younger generation, and I think again, this is maybe a lot of Westerners. A lot of Westerners that will always level this thing. Oh well, Facebook and Twitter and these kind of platforms are not available in China. And I think that one of the reasons for this is because the authorities here are just worried about the manipulation that social media can have on their people. And it's been leveled that this is the reason why a lot of the young Hong Kong have been so, and we saw this in the UK with the Muslims being radicalized. A lot of that started on Facebook. You'd got ISIS people reaching out to these sort of young, vulnerable Muslims and saying, look, become a martyr. And we even had girls that sort of went off to Syria and Iraq to become kind of brides to these sort of ISIS fighters, because they'd been so brainwashed through these social media channels. And I think that's one of the reasons, here, why they don't want this social media here.
I absolutely agree with you. I just watched a documentary on YouTube by a very famous channel called Cold Fusion. He's just like us. He's a vlogger, but he's really popular. Has maybe 500,000 subscribers.
Whoa!
And he just put out a mind-blowing documentary, and it's about how the CIA basically owns Google. Like the CIA Google works hand in hand with Google, and there's so many just tentacles in Google and what they do. So I think it was mind-blowing to watch that.
I'm gonna have to go and watch it. I think there's a lot of this. I'm very into tech, so I'm very into sort of Huawei and these big tech companies here. And I think it's kind of funny that there's obviously this sort of thing in Chinese law that if the government asks for information, they must volunteer it. And kind of people always point the finger at this. Actually, it's just the same in the US, but it's just hidden. I don't believe for 1 second if the CIA go to Google or Facebook and say, right, we need this information, they're going to, and when that Edward Snowden thing came out, it was apparent that they didn't even need to go and ask Google. They got a direct connection into Google servers. So it's just so double standards, and I would say to the US, if you live in a glass house, don't throw stones, man. Because
I could say a lot because I'm reading Edward Snowden's latest book. It's called Permanent Record. I'm reading that right now. And the reason, so it's so funny because whatever the US sort of accuses China of, the US is doing
itself
far worse.
Far worse.
So they say, for example, China has a social credit system. That's just bullshit. I have never met anyone. It's just bullshit. I have never met one person.
It's actually the same as the West credit checking system.
It's a credit. We have a credit.
Yeah, that's right. It's a credit checking system to make sure you're good to borrow money. Yeah,
but the media makes it sound like if I play video games too much, or if I behaved incorrectly, they're going to dock my score. I've never seen that once. I've never met any Chinese person that has that. And
I agree.
but what is true in America, and Edward Snowden was not just some IT guy in CIA. He
No,
was
it was fairly high up, wasn't he?
He was the architect of the data storage system for NSA. He programmed the system. He's a genius. He's an amazing programmer, and he built it. He called it Epic Storage. That was the first name of the system.
Okay.
And what I read about him is that they built this massive server complex it's somewhere in the desert, like maybe in Utah.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
It's gigantic, and they just built it out there, and that is meant to store literally all the data of the whole world. So that, you know why they do that? So that they can, and it tracks everything. It tracks who you call, where you've been. It takes all the data from
all your networks, right?
And the reason they do that is because if they ever want to get you, they can get you. So like Barrett, like Lee, if they ever want to get you for something, they're just gonna look through all your data and they'll find something wrong. You did one thing wrong.
Yeah.
So when you think about Meng Wanzhou, for example, like the Chinese Canadian, or the woman that was pulled in Canada, that's what they probably did. They just sorted through all her data and they just tried to find one thing
to get on it. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's a really interesting case, because I've been reading about the French case in Alstom when France and Germany were ahead in technology of I think it was turbines. Yeah. America had got GE, and they were falling behind, and Alstom and Siemens were powering ahead. So what they did, and it's almost like a playbook, identical incident. They waited for the Alstom, some high executive. As soon as he touched down, I think it was JFK Airport in the States, they arrested him. Yeah. And then they arrested some more executives. They brought charges, all this. Eventually, they forced France, this company in France, Alstom, it was taken over by GE. And as soon as they'd done this takeover deal, all the executives were let out, charges were dropped, and it was simply because they wanted the technology. And I think that's the way this Huawei thing is going. TSMC, or Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, they are more advanced than any US chip fab plants. And within 2 days, for 2 years, TSMC had resisted investing to build a factory in the US. As soon as the US put that restriction that they can't supply Huawei, 2 days later, TSMC says, okay, we'll build a factory in the States. So I think this Huawei thing is more about America acquiring technology than any national security thing. I think that's just a red herring. They just... somewhere in the American administration, they're going, look, what technologies are we behind on? We need to acquire these technologies. And that's the way they're doing it, by playing dirty, I think. So,
absolutely.
I just mentioned it.
I
just get a couple of super chats. So we got one from Peter the Happy Weigoran. 2 great channels working together. A good morning in China. Thank you very much, Peter. And we've got MW Lee 1984. In the 19th century, opium money built the first industrial city and the first 5 railroads in the US. Now, I'm not an expert on that, but I have read a little bit. And there is a couple of people in America, sort of people who know about this, saying that, a lot of the sort of things that were built in the US in the early the first industrial revolution time were paid for by opium money from China. So that's kind of interesting.
That's crazy. Wow. I didn't know that.
And then
I just want to say, if you're watching my, if you're watching my channel, you can, if you're watching from my channel, guys, if you want to do a super chat, I guess you could send a thing to my QR code, and I'll answer your questions. If you do want to send me a super chat, because sorry, you can't do that on Google on YouTube right now, because it's all my monetization is sort of disabled. So so people from my channel, if you do want to send me a super chat, go ahead and scan my QR code. That's one way you could do it if you'd like to do it. You can see it here, or
have you got it in your link or on your channel?
I think it's linked in the channel. So go ahead and check the description.
Okay,
Well,
so I've got another super chat here, and this is sort of what we were talking about. Opinion on Edward Snowden and Julian Assange. Why is the US inciting journalists? What happened to freedom of speech? Yeah, again, I'd like to say this sort of thing where they level this charge all the time at China. Oh, there's no freedom of speech. Actually, when they say that, I mean, I actually think in one sense there's more freedom of speech here in China. The only thing you can't speak about here in China is things that will, potentially bring down the government. This business that
absolutely,
the Chinese can't criticize the government is just not true.
Yeah.
The governments in China actually have websites. So you've got provincial governments, you've got the Beijing government. There are websites that Chinese can go to lodge things that they are unhappy with. And then if they get enough, similar to this where, in the UK, you can go to a website and if enough people sign a petition against something the government's doing, it'll be discussed. And that is pretty much the same here in China. They have websites that they can go. But if you start sort of talking about sort of, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to try and dislodge the government or we're going to cause trouble for the government, that's where they draw the line. But what people need to understand is that's just the rules here. There's many things you can't say in the US. Okay, you can openly criticize the government big time there, but does that really help matters? So both countries don't necessarily have freedom of speech, but it's just in different areas. But just going back to the Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, what's your views about that?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they're both exiled and the fact that they're both wanted by the U.S. justice system, and a lot of journalists would say that it means journalism is kind of dead, because what Edward Snowden revealed and what Julian Assange revealed were critical pieces of information that the American public need to know, right? So, and that's the point of journalism, that you're putting out information that is for the public good. So when journalists can't do their job and can't inform the citizenry, then you effectively don't have a real democracy, right? Because democracy is based on the free flow of information, which allows an informed citizenry to then vote and then do things. But now that the citizenry is not informed and they're not allowed to be informed, then you really have a broken, democratic system. And that's why people like me, we've been a little bit critical of some of the protesters in Hong Kong, because we're like, do you really want that broken democratic system? Like, is that what is that what you're inspiring for? And especially when they raise sorry for changing subjects or whatever.
No, it's fine. It's
yeah, no, I just think those two men being exiled and wanted are just signs that there's a very rotten system and that journalism is, in my opinion, quite dead in America. There still are a few good journalists. I'm not going to deny. There's still some really good
Max.
men
Did
and
you
women
follow
doing
Max
work.
Blumenthal?
I love him. Yeah, I love those guys.
He's
The Gray
a
Zone is
really
great.
yeah, that's fantastic. And you know what's kind of strange? I heard him say, he was in an interview with somewhere. It wasn't a big media, but he says, when he gets a story, he tries to get on some of the mainstream media, and nearly all the time nobody will have him on because he's so against the government narrative that they want to push. So he doesn't ever get any airtime on American mainstream media. And that's like really shit, isn't it? That's really crazy that just because he opposes the views what the government want to push. And this goes back to what you're saying, how the CIA controls such a lot of what goes on there. If you look at some of the stuff, and you look at the mainstream media in the US, and a lot of it is controlled by a very small amount of corporate companies. Yeah, although there's hundreds of channels, newspapers, radio, internet, TV, there's probably 4 or 5 companies that control hundreds of different channels. And,
absolutely,
they're obviously in sort of collaboration with government agencies, because the narrative is all the same that they all push. Yeah, and people like Max
they literally say the same thing. Yeah, they literally say the exact same thing.
Same thing. Yeah,
I've seen videos where every news network is saying the exact same message.
I've seen those exact same videos, man, and it's just unbelievable. But yeah, I love Max Blumenthal, and he does some fantastic journalism, man. Him and his
He's
team.
a real
So yeah,
journalist. He's a rare breed. He's a rare breed in
yeah,
today's day and age. I
yeah.
hope he
It's
doesn't get killed.
yeah,
I'm
I know.
scared.
I mean, it is.
Scary.
I think there's a massive problem now. I recently did a video about sort of the organ harvesting thing and how all the media they control it all links back to Falun Gong, and a lot of people just don't believe it. They don't realize because the Epoch Times push themselves out to be like mainstream media. They're distributing hundreds of free copies, and it's full of just anti-Chinese sort of news. Well, not even news, lies really.
Sure, yeah.
And when the further I looked into it, when I was researching it, and I did use the Grey Zone as one of my sources. And the more you look into it, the more you see that ultimately leads back to Falun Gong, which leads back to the right wing, sort of movement. And you think, wow, they've got all these entities that they control pushing out this anti-China stuff. It's crazy, man. Absolutely crazy. It's.
I can even give you a personal story. I love giving personal
go
accounts
for
of
it,
these
man.
things because well, growing up in Canada, I remember taking the subway when I go downtown. It was really special when I was younger to go downtown because I grew up in the suburbs, so it would take me almost an hour to take the bus and then get the subway. Then when I went downtown, there were these people. I think they were Chinese people or like me, Chinese Canadians. They're handing out these like really sketchy newspapers for free. So they're just these like little half-size newspapers with like really weird news, just like really weird stuff. And I would read it. I'm like, this is very strange. And it was called the Epoch Times. It was the Epoch Times.
Yeah.
Back then they were just running this really crappy, cheesy printing thing, which everyone threw away as garbage. We're like, this is just like random conspiracy theory, weird shit. But somehow they've grown over the years, and now they have like network studios, right? They got China Uncensored, China in Focus. They have all this stuff, and but I remember back in the day, they were just really weird, fringy stuff. I actually downloaded on Wikipedia. I downloaded a tax receipt, and it actually showed that I think some government officials donated, I think, like $5 million to Friends of Falun Gong. So I actually have the tax.
Yeah, I mean they spent something like $1.5 million in 6 months on Facebook. I believe they've been stopped from advertising on Facebook, but they're kind of big on YouTube now, aren't they?
Huge. They're always they're always being suggested to me. Yeah.
They must spend some serious money, and like you say, it makes you wonder where that money's coming from.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure they're not making that off advertising.
I'll share one more personal story. Every time I would go to the Chinese embassy in Toronto, there was always a group of Falun Gong people with these huge displays of organ harvesting thing. You can't miss it. It's these massive billboard type things, and every time you go to the Chinese embassy, you have to pass them and see these images of people that they say have been organ harvested, but you don't know if it's true or not. You can't tell. They just show these really gruesome images. And then they give you this Falun Gong leaflet. Yeah. So these are my personal experiences growing up.
Yeah, I had there's a commenter on that video that I did, and this was a Chinese person who was living abroad, and he says his aunt got involved with Falun Gong and she was really into them. And then sort of years and years later, they found out that she'd sold her house to give them all the money. She'd sold her car and give them the money. And basically they'd kind of taken all her money. She's now poor. She turned to them in the end because she had no money. And when they investigated and it all came out, she'd give hundreds of thousands of dollars to Falun Gong.
Oh my gosh.
Because they kind of sort of conditioned her to thinking that this was the cause, and that if she did all this, come the day where the world ends, she would be saved. And this is the kind of this is the kind of the things that they use, and I think that's crazy, man. Okay, just another super chat here. Zen Yan Chen. Textbook for kids in Hong Kong was manipulated by the associate, which funded by forces. Saw some news that even the textbook in kindergarten, which described police as dog, similar to things happened in Taiwan. So this is similar to what you were saying, how they're teaching a lot of kids in Hong Kong and Taiwan to be anti-mainland.
That's right.
So this is really, I can quite understand why, there's a need to bring this national security up, because I think the Chinese mainland have just got absolutely fed up with other countries interfering in what's going on in Hong Kong. Could you just imagine if Chinese politicians visited the US, or I believe Hawaii as a wanted to become independent, and there was some protest there earlier this year about wanting sort of independence from the rest. And could you just imagine if US politicians went there and they started putting books in kindergarten schools teaching kids to be anti-American there? I mean, you've got to put the shoe on the other foot here and see how that would be seen. It would be, and just something else I'll cite on this. During these sort of riots in America, Trump came out with a statement saying, that the looting starts, the shooting starts. Could you imagine if Xi Jinping had gone, once the rioting and looting starts in Hong Kong, we're going to shoot them all? There'd have been absolutely mayhem in the media, because
they would have,
just because of this
war. America would have declared war on China.
He'd have been absolutely vilified for that. But it's reported in the media. A couple of days later, it's forgot. The media would have dragged that up forevermore, just like they do, like in your video, the Tiananmen thing. Do we have an anniversary for the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of civilians that were killed in Iraq? When America went in there on completely false intelligence of that they got all these weapons of mass destruction, and the West was in, within half an hour, the West could be destroyed by all these weapons of mass destruction, which never materialized, funnily enough. But nobody remembers all those people on an anniversary every year, right? It's amazing.
That's the point. That was the point of my video. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that, as I said before, that made me think on a completely different level. I'd never ever thought of it like that before. And we had a little chat yesterday about how the US supports these corrupt regimes. You look at what Saudi Arabia are doing in Yemen. Kids are being killed every day there by weapons that are manufactured in US factories. But we don't ever have an anniversary to remember those kids.
The civil war in Yemen, it's the worst humanitarian crisis on earth. And the media never talks about it.
But it hardly ever makes the news, right?
Never. But Hong Kong makes the news every day, though. Hong Kong every day.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, it's such double standards. And, I grew up sort of in awe of the USA when I was young. And I think I've said this before, I watched the shuttle launch and I used to think, wow, America, what a great country, And I think for a long time, that I give credit to America. They did some great things, but
absolutely,
sort of more recently, they've seen more of a sort of threat to their dominance as a technological power and a world power. They've become more radical in the things they will do to try and defend that dominance. And I think that's really bad. I mean, I'm very into technology. I think for a world, and if you actually look at a lot of the researchers around the world, they all want to, collaborate with each other. They want to share information, and a lot of time they do. And I think America are trying to stop this now, and I think they'll end up shooting themselves in the foot. You look at this sort of thing he wants to pass now to stop American graduate and postgraduate students. Well, actually, a lot of those stay on and work for American companies. And I think if next month all the Chinese that are working all those tech companies, we're going to go back to China, America would be in deep trouble because they just don't have enough people there to do those jobs. So
I
I
think
think
the connection.
you're a bit sketchy, but you're okay. You've gone. So yeah, I do think. Okay, while Numuves is getting his connection sorted out, I'll address a couple more super chats. So from JK, Singapore, an authoritarian, very successful, better housing, MTR airport and airline than Hong Kongers. Authoritarian can be good for you. The West love Singapore too. Yeah, it's very strange, that is, and I think it's probably because Singapore are no threat to the US. I think the US see China as a big threat, and I think that is the problem. So let's see if we can get Numuves back into the stream.
Hey.
Yeah, he's back.
I'm back in.
Okay, so yeah, so I was just discussing a super chat we'd had about Singapore. So somebody said Singapore, an authoritarian, very successful, better housing, better airports, better airlines than Hong Kong. Authoritarian can be good for you. The West loves Singapore too. And I suggested that's probably because Singapore is no threat to the US. They're pretty advanced society, but and I think that's the same with South Korea. South Korea are a pretty advanced economy, but they pose no threat to the US. So I think the US sort of doesn't really care. Whereas China technologically pose a big threat. And I think it goes, it goes further and deeper in the sense that if you look at a lot of the patents over the last 20 years, all American companies, or a lot of them, and that brings in a huge amount of money to the US. Well, if that starts changing and tip into China's balance, you look at all the patents Huawei have got for 5G, that means people have to pay Huawei to use their technology because they've developed the standards, they've got the patents. And I think America see that as a big issue in the coming years, and I think that's why they've been so negative about China. So
yeah, I'll just add on that. I think the whole world knows that 5G is what would you call it? It's the basic infrastructure for all future technology, because everything.
Yeah, it's the next revolution. IoT will be built on top of it. All this. I said yesterday in the stream, I was lucky enough
that it is, kind of the dominant force, but it's not.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to go to visit Huawei's headquarters earlier this week, and we were talking to some of the techie guys there, and they says they're currently working on technology that you won't see for another 5 years. And they gave us some demonstration of technology that they've rolled out now that they've been working on for the previous 5 years. And man, it blew my mind. Some of the stuff they've got to implement to implement smart cities. It's just like, I was watching these demos and it was like being in a sci-fi movie. They've got systems that can monitor the traffic and they can detect an accident. And it automatically informs all the services to respond to that accident without any human intervention whatsoever. And then it can tell the fire brigade where the nearest fire hydrant is. It can, and this is all by AI and IoT. And I'm thinking, wow, this is just amazing. They're constantly monitoring levels of pollution in the city. And it can even, let's say there's an area of the city which is congested with traffic and the pollution is rising. They can actually, change all the traffic signals and lights to send traffic in different routes to avoid it getting worse. And it's just amazing, man. I was just blown away by this. It's really,
that's why
really
America. Good. Yeah, that's why America wants to take down Huawei. They wanna be dominant in the technology. So
well, I've heard rumors that America were looking at sort of trying to make a bid for Ericsson or Nokia, because as far as I'm aware, America don't have really any companies who are involved in any sort of significant way in 5G, and you've got
not really no.
Huawei, who are probably 12 to 18 months ahead of Nokia and Ericsson. And, there's a whole debate now going on in the UK where, about 2 or 3 months ago, they agreed to let Huawei into building the networks, albeit in a limited way. And now with pressure from America, it seems they want to change their mind. But, you've got sort of the big network operators, Vodafone, EE, British Telecom, saying, well, look, if you make us change from Huawei, it's going to delay the full 5G rollout by at least 2 years. And it's going to cost hundreds of millions of pounds additionally. So who's going to foot that bill? So I think the UK are in a bit of a dilemma at the moment.
I read, I'm not sure if it's totally confirmed, but I did read an article saying that Britain is starting an alliance. So they've suggested that there's an alliance with USA, UK, Canada, Australia, Japan, Korea,
Yeah,
India.
it's 10 countries, isn't it?
Alliance
Yeah.
against China, a 5G alliance. So now you can see the Western countries are trying to form this huge team, like a war, just to try to beat
Absolutely,
China's advantage. And I think the most hypocritical thing is the Western media always says that China steals all the technology from America.
That's
But
bullshit.
here we have 5G where America has no foot in that industry. They have nothing in there. How can you keep accusing China of stealing technology when China has technology that they don't even have?
That's right. I made a video about this because if you look at the high-speed train thing, when China wanted high-speed trains, they put out project tenders to a number of countries, so Japan and Germany were already in there, and they said, "Look, we've got these," and these were contracts for hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, big contracts. But in those contracts, it stated that if you want to be involved in building our high-speed train network, one, you have to use Chinese labor. So you've got to build some of this stuff within China to give Chinese people jobs. And two, you need to agree to transfer the technology. And on the first round of those contracts, Siemens, the German company, didn't agree to that. They didn't want to transfer the technology. So they were left out, and I think they used Japanese companies. Then on the second round, Germany agreed to that transfer because they didn't want to lose out on that massive amount of business. So in effect, China were buying the technology because they were paying
paid for it.
Billions of dollars for it. But then what happened is the Chinese engineers took all this technology and they looked, right, where are the weak points? Let's make it better. So then they developed their own technology, which superseded that of Siemens and the Japanese companies. And at that point then, the West starts shouting, oh, they stole it. But in fact, they didn't steal it. They paid huge sums of money for that, So
absolutely.
Right, I just need to go to another.
It's another BS.
Oh,
it's another BS narrative.
First.
I was just saying it's just another BS narrative.
Go for it.
Peddled by the mainstream media.
Yeah, and okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sure there's IP that is stolen within China. I can't deny that. But you just look at the US. At any one time, there are thousands of lawsuits going on from US companies that have stole technology off other US companies and other countries. And, don't sort of anybody try to kid yourself for 1 minute that everybody around the world's doing this. Every country has got, the UK have got GCHQ, America have got the CIA. What these agencies' prime objective is to spy and steal, from other countries. And I'm sure pretty much every country around the world is doing exactly the same. So it's not just a China thing. Okay, I need to go to a super chat here. We have a particular person, Heng Lin, and they're a big supporter of our channel. So I want to make sure I address their questions. Off topic, but America loves meddling with other people's businesses. Please look at the CIA Tibetan programs. Personally, I don't know nothing about them, but what I do know is that I think the USA does have a big problem in meddling with other countries. And I think the reason that is, for some reason, America think their flavor of democracy, that must be rolled out across the whole of the world. And anybody who has got a different system to that must be wrong, in their eyes. And I think there's a big problem going on here in the sense that And I think why the Western media have this sort of such a negative narrative. If you look over the last 20 years at the living standard of Chinese people has improved beyond recognition. If you look at the living standard of the average American citizen, it's stagnated or potentially got worse. And I think the American administration think, well, we can't have the American people seeing how better Chinese people's lives have increased when here we haven't made any movement whatsoever, because we've always told them that this Chinese communism is no good. So, would if it was shown how well China have done, would American citizens start questioning their system?
That's it. That's the thing. Yeah, I think since the Cold War, they've always been trying to say capitalism is the best city, Western democracy is the best system, and the big threat that China poses is actually kind of stands in the face of all that, right? It sort of contradicts that narrative that
absolutely
that America or the West has been putting out for decades, right? China has shown you don't need to have a Western form of democracy to do well, and you don't need the Western capitalist system.
Absolutely right.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that communism is used, and I think it's an unfair word because China is not communist at all. When in my mind, and I'm sort of just over 50 years old, in my mind, when I hear the word communism, the first countries that come to mind are the previous, what was the old Russia, and like North Korea kind of sort of scenarios. And I'll be honest, before I came, I'll be honest, before I came to China, I would have had the same thing. I thought that people were not anywhere near as free as they are. But since I've been here and I've spent a lot of time here, I think actually, the people, if they just get on with their lives here, it's no different to a lot of Western countries. Okay, like I mentioned before, they can't speak out as much about their government. They can't be as critical, although they do have mechanisms to sort of criticize things. But I think, wow, it's kind of a mix of a socialist capitalist system where it's not communism at all. And the one thing I would say, it would do the Chinese government, I think they should maybe even change the name of the party, to help with Western relations on that, because I think it just conjures up the wrong image totally. So.
Well, I think the name Communist Party, I think it was just an ideal that they wanted to reach. I mean, I think China was communist maybe for, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 years, where they actually gave out rations. Like people were given rations of rice, ration of clothes. So it actually was communist maybe for 10 or 20 years. But after that,
till the Deng Xiaoping,
Deng Xiaoping, he called it socialism with Chinese characteristics. And
so something else I saw, I was watching a really good documentary on, I think the woman was named Sarah Flanders, and she was talking. No, it wasn't Sarah Flanders. It was a Chinese born woman in the US, and she was she was just saying how Deng Xiaoping, not only did he make economic reforms, but he instigated a lot of reforms within the Chinese government. And one of his big reforms was where he made these, because obviously the government, the civil service in China is huge, millions of people, across all the provinces. She was saying how he introduced this system of a sort of scorecard for them to make them sort of perform well before they got promoted. But a lot of people don't realize that it's a results-based system, whereas the Western democracy is not results-based at all. It's just bullshit, really. I'm very disillusioned with Western politics. The more I've got into it, the more disillusioned I've become with it.
I'd like to make a point You mentioned about freedom of speech and how in China, you don't really have the right to be like F this person, F that person. That's not something that is really tolerated. But I think what I don't like about Western media or the Western perception is they try to say that that's a communist thing. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Oh, it's not.
absolutely.
I don't. In my opinion, I don't think that's about communism or authoritarianism. I think it's actually Confucian culture, and I'll say that because I'm Chinese Canadian, so I was kind of brought up with a little bit of that. But
Uh-huh.
more importantly, I lived in South Korea, and South Korea is a Western democracy. Like their system was built by America, and they
Uh-huh.
have the exact. But the interesting thing is South Korea still has a lot of Confucianism roots, a lot of Confucianism culture.
Uh-huh.
So even though Korea is a Western democracy, it still follows these Confucian ideas that you don't just outwardly criticize people like that. Like you have to have a little bit of respect for
Sure.
your elders, for leaders. I think it's
I think
not a
we'll
try.
I think we're losing you a little bit there. The connection might be a bit of a problem. Yeah, I think it is interesting here. I'll just go to a super chat off Trevor Norman while you get your connection back. And Trevor says Trump only wants every country not to use Huawei because it's the only equipment the CIA can't use to spy on everyone. I actually think there's some truth in that. If I remember the Edward Snowden thing where he revealed that the CIA were intercepting Cisco equipment to install back doors so they could listen on countries in other parts of the world, and that allowed them to listen into Angela Merkel. Yeah, are you back with us, Jonathan? Oh, it seems Jonathan's not back with us yet. Oh, is he back with us now? Maybe not. Yeah, so I do think yeah, you may be actually right there, Trevor. I think that the US have been caught red-handed. There's mountains of evidence against them for interfering and spying on other countries, putting backdoors in equipment. Yeah, actually, against Huawei, there's no evidence whatsoever. Okay, so we will be wrapping up the show shortly. I would ask you to check out Jonathan's channel. The channel is called Numuves. That's Numeves. Numuves with a U, not an O. And he does make some really, really great content. Some of his videos give you a very different angle on things, and I think he has that unique angle because he's Chinese Canadian. So it is really really go and check him out. Subscribe to his channel if you haven't already, and yeah, go and have a look. So let me see if there's any more questions I can deal with. This is China. You said one of your videos that your lifelong dream is to leave China and move your family to the USA. Oh, I wasn't aware of that about This is China. I think he at one point he really liked the USA. I think he does like the USA. I'll be honest, when I was first married, we went on our honeymoon to the USA, and at that time I did have a sort of desire to go and live there. But I think as you grow up and you get older and you've got wiser, and as I said earlier, I think my sort of perception of the US has changed somewhat over the last 15 years when I've seen sort of them being more aggressive to other nations and more meddling in other people's affairs. Just give a shout out to a few people. Yin Hao Core, this is even better than yesterday's discussion. Great topics. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. MW Lee 1984, thank you very much for your super sticker. Okay, let's have a look. The Quantum Alchemist, watch a few of his videos. Numuves makes very good content, openly critical. I like that. Yeah, he is. His content is very, very good. He's very thoughtful. He research is good, and he, as I say, being a Chinese Canadian. He has a good perspective on some things that maybe I don't speak a lot of Chinese. I speak some basic Chinese, but I don't speak a lot of Chinese, and that sometimes can be a disadvantage for me. But I have spent a lot of time here. I talk to a lot of Chinese, especially in the big cities, speak really good English. So there is communication there. Okay, Roby G180. Hey, Numuves, how come you're able to speak Cantonese and Mandarin? We're trying to get him back on now. He obviously has a technical problem. He can speak Cantonese because his family are from Hong Kong originally. And then when he moved to China some years ago, he started to pick up more Mandarin. So he can speak both Mandarin and Cantonese. Let's see what else we've got. So Arthur Larson, I love the USA and would love to be in China again right now. Yeah, well, sadly, it's pretty difficult to get back into China right now because of the COVID situation. It is starting to open up. They've done a deal with a number of companies. I know Germany's one of them. South Korea is another. And I think they're starting to open up to more as we slowly go. And I think they will look at doing it on a sort of country per country basis, first and foremost for business visa holders. I know that Germans have started flying back in. Germany have a huge business presence here in China. I know Germans have started flying back in. And I think as we go more and more, we'll start to come back in. Okay. Another super chat here. Thank you for Xiaoxinan. I think I've pronounced that right. Great topics today. Good discussion. Numuves said that he was educated to dislike China before. How and when did he change his mind? Unfortunately, I can't ask him at the moment because he seems to have a technical issue where he can't get back in. Okay, I've just received a WeChat message from him that he's got a problem with his network and he can't come back on. I think from what I understand of Numuves, he changed his mind when he came to spend time here in China. He's been here for some years, and I think it started to change his perspective on how he thought about it. And I can say that's probably the same for me as well. Before I came to China some 12 years ago, I had quite a different view of China. I was led to believe that it was much more oppressive and a controlling government here than it actually is. And the first time I turned up here, it was in Shanghai, and I was like blown away. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then, the more time I've spent here, the more I've got to like it, and the more I see the difference from what actually is the reality here to what the Western media tell it is like. And I would encourage that to get to know a place, you need to come here and experience it for yourself. So if any of these sort of people who are so negative on China out there, please, get the opportunity if you can to come here and experience it for yourself. And I can promise you'll see that it is just not like what it is portrayed to be in the Western media. Norman Tan, thank you for your super chat, Norman. Really appreciate that. Thank you guys for a very good discussion. A lot of interesting insights. Yeah, really appreciate that. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Thomas M, for your super sticker. That's much appreciated. And it's simply down to you guys that we're able to do what we do. Me and Ollie do this full time. And it's due to the support of you guys. We can keep bringing you these shows. We can keep making content. And that's what our plan is for the foreseeable future. So as we have lost Numuves, thank you, Eric NG, again, another regular in our live streams and our chat boards. Appreciate your super sticker for your support. So I am going to, Yin Hot Core, thank you for your super chat. What are actually the most important differences between communism and socialism? I don't really know whether I'm sort of I don't know whether I'm that qualified to answer that. I think, in my perception, communism, they pretty much control everything. Where socialism tends to try and share the benefits for everyone. But I think China is a mixture between socialism and capitalism. I don't think they're socialist. I don't think they're capitalist. I certainly don't think they're in my head the definition. I don't think they're communist at all. I think they try to. So let me give you an example. All the sort of services like telecom services, electric, water, gas, the cost of gas for your cars and petrol, that's all controlled by the state because it's a right for everyone. And obviously in China, they don't believe that companies should make profit out of those services. Then things that are not sort of basic services, they're not all controlled by the government. The government don't have a share in all of those companies. You know, you've got companies like Alibaba, Tencent, they're private companies. The state has some shares in the large banks, so they kind of half private, half government owned. And there are a lot of companies that run like that. They kind of sometimes the government might be a majority shareholder, sometimes they might be a minority shareholder. But in my opinion, that the government tries to put in these policies for the benefit of a majority of the population. And that's kind of different if you look at sort of electricity, gas, water in a lot of Western countries. They're run by private companies, and the first concern of those private companies is to make profit for their shareholders. So that's not always the best benefit for their consumers, for the population. Henglin, thank you again for all your support. You are a fantastic supporter, and again, it makes it so we can keep doing this channel. We will continue along that. We absolutely massively appreciate support like you give us to keep making the content. We've got loads of stuff planned for you in the near future, and we will keep you all up to date with that. And thank you, Tony. My first time trying this super chat. I think that might be Tony, my friend in Zhaoqing here, but I'm not sure because it's got Tony on there. But if it's not Tony, my friend in Zhaoqing, thank you very much again for your support. Really, really appreciated. So I am going to wrap that up for today. Next Sunday, Ollie will be back. We've got our Wednesday live stream on Wednesday evening at 8:30 p.m. So that is a bit better for you European guys over there. And then on Saturday morning, we have our Let's Talk China with the panel. And Ollie will be back next Sunday. So anyway, as always, for now. Oh, one more I forgot. Thank you very much for our moderators, Samantha Jenkins and Jerry from This Is China. If you get a chance, go and check out Jerry's channel. Another great channel. He's a very positive guy. He's married to a Chinese woman here. He has a mixed blood daughter. Great guy, great channel. So check that out. But anyway, as always, for now, take care.